Good morning. We're going to get started. We want to stay on time. My name is Chris Gambroulis. I'm with Ivory Development. We're the development arm for Ivory Homes, which is the for-profit arm that funds Ivory Innovations, among other things, is one of the funders, and has convened Ivory Innovations here at the University of Utah the last number of years. So I'm on the greedy developer side, but also involved a lot in advocacy at the state level for changes to land use codes. And this year, one of the things that we're really talking about is an adoption of modular codes in Utah. And so I'm going to try to make this not so Utah-centric, but I'll just introduce the speakers. I'll go from left to right. We've got John Hanna Spagana. Say it. Spagana, sorry. I'm Gambroulis. People shred it all the time. Cameron Deal from the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Justin Stewart from Synergy Modular. We've got Ryan Kolker from the International Code Council, and Representative Thomas Peterson, who's in the Utah House and is also the state building official. So the title of this session is The State of Offsite Regulatory in the U.S., so around the country. So I'm going to ask Justin to start off and just say, what is the state of offsite regulatory modular in the country? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it?
All right. Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I think this was covered a little bit in an earlier segment. I think it's best represented by that map that was put up there. We have 50 states. Within those 50 states, about 35 of them have statewide modular regulations. Of those 35 modular regulations, all of them are different. But even beyond that, within those 50 states, we have, 6 figures worth of jurisdictions having authority, with building officials and fire marshals that ultimately have say and the ability to demand unique things out of buildings. Building a large-scale multifamily affordable housing project, fire marshals review approved plans, everything signed off, stamped. Under construction, they have the ability to come in and demand changes at any stage of construction, which costs all of us considerable money. Example, had a fire marshal demand sidewall dry head sprinklers on a completed building because there was a 4-foot concrete patio outside with no overhang. It's affordable housing, and that was $650,000 that could not be used for affordable housing anymore. It was instead used on dry head sprinklers. So getting back to the point of it, right now, one of the biggest challenges is the fragmentation across the country. Getting statewide regulations is, of course, of paramount importance. Getting national consistency would really drive scale.
So one of the things that's really been driving the people locally here in Utah to adopt a modular code, a statewide modular code, is the hypotheses, in my mind, is threefold. One is that it's less expensive. The other is it's higher quality. And the third hypothesis for me is that it's a really good solution for rural Utah that struggles with workforce and access to supplies. So I'm going to ask Ryan, nationally and all of the things that are going on, do those things hold true? Can we, in Utah, can we expect that we will see those three things?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think there's a few things that we see opportunities in the offsite construction space. One is certainly quality. If you think about in a factory, not having to deal with winter, for instance, having a skilled workforce that's working in the same location every day, doing the same tasks, having all the tools and technologies they need at their disposal, being able to have higher tolerance or lower tolerances and more quality, from the factory, I think is essential. I think the other piece, and you mentioned the workforce issue, in addition to sort of the rural workforce challenges, we're also seeing urban workforce challenges as well. And so again, having a even more diverse workforce in the factory who don't want to be those construction workers, on job sites, in the middle of winter, is a huge opportunity to attract, new professionals into the workforce. So I think that's certainly an opportunity as well. And then we see, opportunities to address some of the other priorities that communities may have around sustainability. You have, less project waste. You have less disruption in communities as well. If you can get a house, on a site, within a few weeks rather than which could be dragged out to, several years, the neighborhoods, neighbors like that a lot as well.
Yeah, so even if it's not on a per square foot basis less expensive, time is our greatest enemy in construction, right? It's a bigger enemy than the cost of lumber or other materials. So, John, we had a chance to visit a few weeks ago, and I asked you this question, and Justin touched on this with this hundreds of thousands of people involved, jurisdictions, and then all of the other people involved. We have a tendency, I think, and I'm guilty of this, that we use things like modular and manufactured and HUD housing and trailers. We use them interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable, are they? I mean, they can be, but not necessarily, right? So would you, in terms of around the country, because this is supposed to be a national conversation, are we using the terms right, and how can we make sure that when we adopt a code in Utah that we're training the right way?
Yeah, great question. So the biggest example I can use to understand modular construction, we're not a product, we're a process. So if you think of automobile manufacturing, it's the same car being built through a production line. That's the way we build in modular construction. It's in a manufacturing facility. If you go in 10 of them, you'll see a different variety of how they do things. There may be more automation in some, different craning systems, different moving systems, but they're all working in specific areas. So one may be doing framing, one may be doing drywall, one may be doing MEP, but it's a production line. And that's how we're able to create those efficiencies of getting things through very quickly, saving on time. And here's the kicker. To your point about manufactured housing. Manufactured housing, as it's traditionally known, is built to HUD code. And I'm not here to bust on HUD code. There's a place for it, and there's certainly a need for it. But modular construction is built to the same IBC for commercial, IRC for single family codes as you would build site built. So it's not a lesser standard. It's, as I said, it's a process. And with that process and gaining efficiencies in time, you gain efficiencies in less waste, you gain efficiencies in less interruption to wherever the site is being constructed. And I know Utah is not a huge union state, but I have to throw this in here. When you have union labor say you're taking jobs away from us, well, we're not, because there's site work that still has to be done. So would you rather have 100% of the work on 10 projects or a fraction of the work on 100 projects? So it's a win-win for everyone, and especially when we're talking about affordable housing, the greatest need that we're trying to meet are those that need housing. So if we can find a way through modular construction to build it faster, less expensive, less waste, it's a win for all those that are involved.
So, John, I'm going to stay with you, and I want to ask, because you've been doing this around the country, a lot of the pushback that we've talked about from local officials is the loss of, and I'll get to Cameron in a second, the loss of authority or oversight, and how do other jurisdictions deal with that, and how do you train, building officials at the local level when you're doing either a single family or duplex or a 6-story apartment building that's modular? How do you overcome those objections?
Sure. So the way to understand a modular program and how it works is the efficiencies that it creates in the regulatory process. So for example, and I know we have Cindy Davis from Virginia here in the room, who was sharing with us earlier. So Virginia, pretty large state, right? They have about 2 to 3 people that manage their modular program. That's pretty darn efficient for a state-run program, correct? Because they utilize the advantages of having a third-party inspection agency that are working on behalf of the state to do inspections in the factories, to do plan reviews, and they hold the authority to audit them and hold them accountable in order to keep their license to do that type of work in the states. You take a state like California, 5 people run their entire program because of the exact same reason. So it literally gives the program administrators more authority to have oversight over these third-party inspection agencies that are doing the work, and frees them up to work with local building inspectors. And trust me, in my job in government affairs, so we have about 650 members in our trade association. Most of my conversations are where a local building inspector doesn't understand modular building codes. So what I'm able to do is get on the phone. If I can't work it out with the local myself, I get one of the program administrators to get on a 3-way call with me. They explain, local inspector, this is the site work that you're in charge of. This is what's already been approved through the modular program. So it creates efficiencies. I doubt you'll find a local building inspector doesn't say they're overworked and underpaid. So it creates more efficiencies for them to be able to do their jobs, do them better, and have that partnership. It's not that we're overtaking or the third parties are overtaking the responsibilities. It's creating a partnership so that we can create greater efficiencies in construction.
I'm gonna let Cameron jump in here because he and Jared, who's the legal director at the Utah League of Cities and Towns, have been having a lot of conversations with local building officials around this. You want to jump in on that conversation?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everybody who's joined us from out of state. One thing I hope you can take back from this conversation is that in Utah, when we face difficult challenges like housing affordability, we have a spirit of collaboration here. And so Chris and I, for example, view the world differently. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
And
we're also neighbors.
We're neighbors, and more importantly, we both want the same general outcome for the state. It's just a matter of how we get to that outcome. I have the privilege, as the director of the League of Cities and Towns, to represent 255 municipalities, so we're part of that regulatory system you were describing, more than 1,400 elected officials, let alone all the staffers. And does anybody know how many cities there are nationwide? A lot. Good answer. Good answer. Over 19,000. Over 19,000. So I can sympathize with the concern, the frustration, the perspective of here is this new way of doing things that for 19,000 local governments around the country, you're saying, wait a minute, what does this mean for us, not just here, but going forward? So that is as background to the conversation that we've been having with our board of directors and with building officials around the state. And it really is a reframing, and I use that pun intentionally here, but a reframing of the role of that local building inspector. And I appreciated the way that you described it, because ultimately, when I think of a house, I think of the construction work that I did in high school where we're all on the site, right? And so therefore the regulatory model is built around that. And really what we're talking about is that the future of construction is going to look this way. So what does that regulatory process look like? Now, there are still some key principles that need to be factored in, and as part of our research, we've been trying to make sure we get that right balance in Utah. So we keep using the term third-party inspection, for example. I mean, that is a critical piece because you want to avoid the perceived conflict of interest, if not actual conflict of interest, that comes with self-inspections. There are insurance issues there, there's safety, health, safety, welfare pieces, and as local governments in Utah, we're responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of our residents. That's our statutory and constitutional charge. But that is going to look different in a modular setting than in a traditional stick frame setting. So it's reframing what the role is of that local inspector when the product is happening, or when the product is being built at the factory, and then it comes on site. So what are our responsibilities on site versus what's being handled beforehand? And I appreciate the example of thinking about it more as a car than as a house, because that's actually how I've been describing it to our members as well. But that's a mindset shift, not just for building inspectors, not just for elected officials, but for residents in general. And so the more this high quality product comes online, the more it helps address the affordability crisis, and the more it helps with environmental sustainability, and the more positive examples there are, the more I think it's ultimately going to be embraced by the public, which then in turn should ease the burden on the production side.
Justin, do you want to jump in on that?
I do. Unique perspective of we build, traditional site-built, if you will, site-built construction, as well as full volumetric modular construction in multiple states across the Western United States, so in a lot of different jurisdictions. And a perspective I'd like to put out there is, right now, each one of those 19,000 cities, countless other counties, countless other jurisdictional boards in different areas, all are adopting, in most cases, a version of the International Building Code, modifying their version of the International Building Code uniquely, and this is done at a very local level with very limited resources. You contrast that with what Sweden has done in creating Eurocode. You have tremendous resources to analyze best practices, code, how do we get to environmental standards, how do we get to performance standards, tremendous resources to create a much better code that is adopted across the board. So when we build in the city of Seattle, they have pretty remarkable resources. So they have their own energy code, they have a lot of their own building codes right there in the city of Seattle. We go build in a small town in Arizona, they don't have those resources. Their building department is a person. And yet that person is still modifying their local version of a building code. So take modular out of it, having more unified building codes creates a safer, higher performing, higher quality building for everybody.
Representative, I'm going to jump to you. You're not only in the House of Representatives, but you're also the state building official. The state of Utah adopts the building code here. It's not modified at the local level. It's actually adopted by the state. So potentially we have the ability to be a little bit more efficient. So as a state building official, maybe you can give a little context to why the state adopts it rather than let 245 cities do it and the one guy in the small town. 19,000 cities, by the way. Like, our founding fathers are rolling over in their graves. Man, that's just crazy talk. That's a lot of government.
Thanks, Chris. And I want to tell you, Chris, thank you for putting this together, and thank you for involving me in the conversation as we've talked about this. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and I think Justin, to the question, Justin really hit the value of having a statewide code. And in the early 90s, we recognized the value of having a statewide code, and we implemented in that for our entire state, create uniformity throughout jurisdictions, and also to provide a level of understanding for contractors and inspectors to be able to perform their job uniformly across the state. So I think as we look at this code and as we develop this code, and we are working very closely with Jared, with Cameron, with Chris, and all the parties involved to come up with a good code that we can try to help all the jurisdictions in our state feel comfortable that what they're getting has been properly inspected, properly reviewed, and that as it transitions into their city or their county, they can feel comfortable that it's a good product.
Yeah, if I could add a little bit and sort of bring together what Justin and Tom were talking about. If we think about sort of the site-built process, it was fine to have a statewide code or even a local code, because a builder can decide, I'm just going to work, within this general area and comply with these specific requirements. But if we talk about moving to an industrialized process where a large chunk of capital investment is being put into factories to develop panelized systems, modular systems, it doesn't pencil out anymore to have various different processes within different states or within different localities to be able to retool that industrialized process every single time to meet the needs of a particular state or locality. So the offsite construction standards that we developed with the Modular Building Institute is really to help provide that level of consistency so that we can get to that level of industrialization that we're really looking at while still recognizing those nuances at the state or local level, whether there are, particular hazard conditions or some of that. But if we can make sort of the process for demonstrating that compliance more streamlined, that really allows the efficiencies in the offsite construction process to actually work.
Yeah, and it's been touched on a couple of times. It's just like this level of security or comfort that the building officials, that once they see the plans, they feel like it's okay. But if they haven't seen them or they haven't been there to watch it before it's closed up, that somehow there's something could be wrong with that. But as we're rolling this out in Utah, it probably behooves us to make sure that those local building officials are brought in, that we're sending them the plans, right? Like that we're doing that. Are there places where that's really beneficial, and they're sending the plans to them that they're like, look, don't redline the heck out of these things, but take a look at them so that you get a comfort level, right? Is there somewhere that is making sense? You're nodding no. Cameron's like, absolutely. So this is going to be good now. Right.
What's interesting about the map that was put up earlier is that the nuance when you get into them is even more complicated than what was on the map, right? Yeah. So you do have a lot of states that still have a local authority component to it. And in fact, when we started this dialogue a few months ago, that was our starting position, is let's just, and I see a couple of people who've been involved in those discussions like nodding their head, because ultimately our initial thought was, let's just extend the regulatory authority from that existing building inspector to the factory. And it was an educational opportunity for us, for them to come back and say, look, you don't want your local building inspector essentially hanging out at the factory 24/7. Yeah, so you're shaking your head no, right? But I think that is part of the learning curve, right? So for those who couldn't hear this, is again very informative, right? He said that there are examples of where within the factories they've built the little houses. I'm thinking of like the guardhouse in front of Kensington Palace. Is that what we're talking about? Where the building inspector is there and
it's an
changing
ADU.
Of the guard?
It's an ADU.
Oh, okay, Tower of the Penitentiary. Right. And you're saying that's not a best practice? No, okay, just clarifying. But I think this does get back to that mindset piece, right? Is what is, if the end outcome, it's always better to focus on the outcome, like where are we trying to accomplish here, and then work backwards. So if the end outcome is we want to facilitate more modular construction, and we want to make sure they're safe, and we want to make sure that they meet the building code, great, we all agree on that. So then does it make sense to have the local building inspector there 24/7? Does it make sense to have a third-party entity do it? Does it make sense to have the state do it? I mean, we're still finishing the answers to those questions here locally, but it has been interesting to look in more detail at the 35 states because, again, they've all taken slightly different approaches about the role of local government.
So to the topic of local jurisdiction having oversight to the factory-built portion, what you're looking at there is the second you have two different bodies reviewing the same section of work, you're creating a level of inconsistency that will not allow any scale. It will create incredible inefficiencies in the process, and people will remain site buildings because they will not go through that. To what your question is there. So for example, in the state of Washington, you guys will see this later this afternoon, but we're just finished an affordable housing project up there. It was 100 units on a podium. That project, so the state of Washington, at the time in which this project was submitted and was a state-run modular program, state inspection, state plan review, no third party. During COVID, labor and industries in the state of Washington had quite a bit of a labor force reduction. Labor and industries is also responsible for reviewing all electrical other than the city of Seattle, and elevators across the state. With that workforce reduction, this affordable housing project was delayed more than a year at the state level plan review. And this is a project the land was donated by the county to be a case study on modular and affordable housing. And it was delayed more than a year. And it was this project and some efforts by MBI and others to create an emergency rule allowing third parties to plan review and inspect. And when that rule came in place, this project, those plans were reviewed by NTA and approved within, I think it was 10 days.
So
after
it
being
was a
delayed for more
good
than
case study then on local government and state government, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely was.
If I could add a little bit on, I think where the opportunity or the need is relative to local officials. I think there's a huge opportunity for education and getting them comfortable with the offsite components that are showing up in their jurisdiction. So the Code Council has been doing a lot to educate building officials on, what are the various different forms of offsite construction, how are they regulated, how are they certified. So I think that's a huge piece of it. I think the other opportunity as folks are considering offsite construction projects in jurisdictions is bringing the local officials to the factories, seeing what's happening in those factories, understanding the quality assurance process that's happening there, so that when that unit does show up in their jurisdiction, they know that there's a process behind it, that somebody's been looking at it, that they feel comfortable what is showing up does actually meet the needs of their community.
And they're not out of the process, right? They're not just showing up with boxes and the boxes are sitting on the ground, right? They're going to put them together on site. So maybe talk about what the local officials' role is when these modules. By the way, for those of you in the modular construction industry, I hate the term module. It just sounds like the Jetsons. It's just I want to call them a house. I want to call them a unit or a home or something. So maybe take that back to your groups and think about that. You're welcome. You're welcome. Name them the Chris. I don't know. But Ryan, these modules show up and the local official's still there, right? And it still has to meet that local code and the soils conditions and the utilities.
Yeah, so the local officials still responsible for all of the site conditions, utilities, infrastructure, foundations, and then once the units get to the job site, assuring that they're connected in the appropriate manner. So, as those utility hookups come to the module, as the modules are connected together to the foundation, to any structural system, all of that falls into the local code officials' requirements.
Let alone land use, fire life safety, overall appearance of the building, everything else. It follows the same process that any other building would.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to land use here in a minute. That's the big elephant in the room.
Well, one thing that I work with our membership in doing, and unfortunately not all of them do it, but the ones that do see the benefits, is whenever a project is being considered and it's decided this project is going modular. Sometimes I help coordinate it, sometimes they do it themselves, but they need to have a conversation with the architect, the engineer, manufacturer, GC, the state agency modular program, if there is one, and the local jurisdiction building official. If they will have, or if anyone will have those discussions before the project even begins, there will never, that I've seen, ever be a situation that there's a hiccup with anyone wondering what's their responsibility, what's my role, whether it's from a regulatory perspective, a construction perspective, or an on-site versus in the manufacturing facility perspective, and things will go extremely smooth. If any of those entities that I mentioned are not connected from day one that the project is going to be modular, there's a really good chance that somewhere down the road, if you're a member of MBI, you're going to be calling me to say, so-and-so doesn't understand, can you help? We've hit a delay. And then that's where I come in and have to do the back work to help them understand, which is the word I like to use. We're never accusatory or cause conflict. I help them understand the process and their role in the process so that the project can move forward.
Representative Peterson, you're a building official. All you do is work with building officials. What's your advice for us here and for others that are doing this around the country? How do we make sure that we don't end up having to call John?
I think John hit it on the head. It's educational. If you're planning on doing one of these projects, have an educational meeting, a pre-construction meeting before you permit, explaining what you're planning on doing, how it comes together. A lot of building officials are not familiar with this process. But what I would say to cities or counties that have concerns with what we're talking about here is we've been doing this for decades in the state of Utah with manufactured housing. This is just a different way of doing it, but really the end result is no different. And so for the hesitancy of what it is, it's an educational piece. We need to be out there educating folks on what it is, how it's built. I think there is some issues with allowing public employees to go to a factory. That may not work well, but there are YouTube videos. I've YouTubed, Autovol is here. A lot of people have YouTube. A lot of these companies have YouTube videos where you can actually go watch their process and see how detailed the process is to guarantee the quality that you're getting when you go through these projects.
One other perspective I just want to bring up, because obviously the pre-meetings and the education and the understanding pieces are of critical importance. I think we all agree on that. But the goal is to get beyond it. Right now, that's where we're at. And that's one of our, if you call it, strategic advantages as a company, is we're really good at that. And we know the ins and outs of volumetric modular. We know the scope delineation, how to work directly with factories. We know how to work through the procurement and the submittal and the model integration process. But that's not a very scalable model. If we, as a general contractor, have this incredible, unique advantage and a barrier to entry into this type of construction, how are we going to scale that? And so the goal is to get to a place where we're not having to individually educate at every project.
So we've been building, I've been working at Ivory Homes for 30 years, and we haven't really changed our building process at all in the 30 years I've been at Ivory, and we build about 1,000 homes a year. We started doing factory-built trusses about 25 years ago. Before that, they were stick framing trusses, and now we're craning them in, right? This is kind of like that. That's how I've looked at this, this is kind of like that. Like if we were bringing panelized walls in and we were doing those kinds of things to create that efficiency. But back to the inspections and the quality is, once those panels are closed up, there's this sense that the third-party inspectors are not doing the inspections as rigorously as they would if they were a public employee. Because when I brought up the roof trusses, somebody said, yeah, but you can see them. And once you close them up, you can't see what the electrical is. You can't see the plumbing. I'm like, but somebody saw it, right? And so these third-party inspectors, that and building permit revenue are the two big objections that I've heard here. So I want to dig into this third-party inspector thing, because I brought it up in an earlier meeting and everyone went like this. Yep, exactly. So where are they getting their training, John? Like, where are these third-party inspectors? Like, they didn't just show up. You didn't just hire me, right? They probably started off as a building official somewhere, right?
Well, and we were talking about after our meeting earlier, is each state has the ability, when they create their modular program, as to what the qualifications are, whether that's they're a licensed architect in the state, a licensed engineer, how many years experience they have. They can put in their program this is the criteria you have to meet to be a third-party inspector in our state. And so then it's up to the third-party inspection agencies to hire people that meet that criteria in order to do business in the state. So they're essentially, you're setting the guidelines and the parameters. Here's our expectation. If you want to do business in our state third-party inspection agency, you must have someone on staff that they're doing the work in the state, and this is the criteria they must meet.
And often those criteria mirror or exceed the requirements of site code officials in the state. So you're getting the same level or even higher experience or certification for the inspectors in the factory.
And to bring a little levity and also maybe some perspective, 20 years ago, I was a superintendent for Pulte Homes. And so, Ivory builds 1,000 homes a year. And to just call a spade, once I had a relationship with a building inspector, they didn't walk those houses. They asked me if the house was done right. And
Never happens. I don't.
They would drive up in their truck. I'd put a inspection slip through their window. They would sign it and keep driving.
Pulte Homes, ladies and gentlemen.
In Tucson, Arizona, mind you. Tucson,
Arizona.
So
But you happy you bought there?
to call a spade, that's happening, and it's a relationship and a trust base. Now, if there was ever a single time in which I said something was done right, and he got out of his truck and went and looked at it and it wasn't, you think he'd ever do that again? No. But that is really the state of on-site inspections, if we're going to call a spade. The next level I'll take that to is from our travels internationally with ModX. Japan is a perfect example. They self-certify and self-inspect. So a factory is certified for their QA/QC processes. If there is ever one willful violation, they're on a 2-year probation and cannot build anything.
So I'll readily admit that, so we built 25,000 homes now. I think we had 20,000 homes like 4 years ago. They're not all perfect. Tolerances are looser in the field. You're dealing with human beings in the elements, right? It might be snowing one day that the roof went on. It might be raining the other day. It might be 120 degrees. So the idea that stick-built or individually built homes are somehow better because the inspector can see them, I would challenge that even as a home builder. And one of the reasons why Clark Ivory even had the crazy idea even to create Ivory Innovations and we're talking about modulars because as a company in an industry, we know we need to evolve and we need to be able to bring some of these things in. But as I've looked at some factories, and I went up to Boise and had a chance to see Autoval, the CapEx to create a factory like that is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so if they get one thing wrong and they do it 100 times, that's a big problem. Now we can make a mistake in the field, right? We can, and it's pretty easy to, like, we don't tear foundations out, but it's like you frame it straight, you do some different things, but what makes this work better is that there is an economic incentive to not have those mistakes in the field, right?
Absolutely. There's also traceability. With any level of automation, you have a level of record keeping, traceability, and lifetime knowledge of everything that was built. So I would argue that computers and robots are a lot more accurate than human eyes.
Would you say that your members, by and large, John, are that they're feeling that greater accountability because of the capital expenditures to even create these factories? Would you say that's a common?
Absolutely. And you choose an example. I know we've got Fading West here, Eric Schaefer, glad to see you here. But one of the things that I worked on in Colorado is, they have a modular program. It's a good one. But we were able to take their program and turn it into state funding, $40 million to support the growth of the modular industry to build affordable housing. Again, our topic here today, more affordable housing. But what they didn't understand, as we were having these discussions when the bill was being written and eventually passed, was $40 million is not going to build a modular manufacturing facility. You need to add at least another 0 in there, and you might get 1, because it does cost money. Now, $40 million, can it build houses? Absolutely. and I was part of the team that wrote the guidelines of how they're divvying up that money. But to have an understanding of what can we use our dollars the most strategically for to build affordable housing, there has to be an understanding of what our industry does and what level it takes to build a facility and make it functional, but then understanding once you get that, the efficiencies that are gained in the long term. It's not just the building, it's the creation of it and then the long-term development moving forward.
So I think one interesting thing to add on to that is, there's opportunities beyond just addressing affordable housing. So there's economic development opportunities, workforce development opportunities as well. So we've seen City of Milwaukee, for instance, put out an RFP to bring a factory into the city to build affordable housing for the city and to develop a workforce for the city. So it's a sort of broader initiative beyond just sort of factories, but addressing a lot of the issues that communities are facing as well.
And to bring the greedy capitalist perspective into it, regulation right now is just preventing private side capital investment into the space. Consistent regulation, especially at a nationwide level, you don't have to put $40 million out there to go try to get a factory, or $400 million to try to get a factory. There is a ton of investment capital dying to get into the innovation of construction space, and they just don't see a scalability path forward right now to do it. So there's a tremendous amount of capital that can come into this space that does not need to come from the government if we could get regulations consistent nationwide.
So I'm going to bring some of this together. Efficiency. So I mentioned that we will build about 1,000 homes this year. We have about 500 homes under construction today. We have about 1,200 apartments. They're all 100% being stick built. None of it's modular. On any given day, about 2,500 people go to work on an Ivory Homes job site, just roughly, or are involved in somehow, right? Like title companies and other things. So if you can build that many homes a year with 100 people on the factory floor, and you can pump them out and the quality's higher and it's faster, it would seem to me that that would be something that as a state we would want to get behind. Now, obviously, this room isn't full of a bunch of Ivory framers who would probably wonder why I was advocating for that, right? And I'm not necessarily advocating we get rid of all of it, right? Like, this isn't the solution, it's a solution to part of our issue. I don't know that we change everything for this, but the efficiencies are just phenomenal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw the graphic earlier of the aging construction workforce. So there's two opportunities in the factory. So one is actually keeping those folks active in construction longer. So if you don't have to keep climbing up ladders, lugging bricks, whatever it is, you may be more willing to be in the factory and also mentor younger folks within the industry. I think there's also opportunities to attract new folks into the workforce. So women, veterans, other folks who don't want to be sort of out on a job site, but go to the same location every day, have certainty that if they need to get to home or elsewhere, they have that opportunity as well. I think the other piece is it's an opportunity to attract new folks into the industry. I mean, frankly, offsite construction is much cooler than sort of sitting on a job site with a hammer and a nail gun. So there's opportunities to bring new folks into the industry as well.
Justin's like, I felt pretty cool when I was doing it. Like, I don't know about you.
I mean, I was going to say, that's, it's not.
Let's tap the brakes a little bit there, Ryan.
I feel like this is actually a good point to reference that the League Board of Directors, which includes mayors and council members from across the state, last month endorsed getting to yes in having solutions in the modular space in Utah. So for all the reasons, all the policy reasons you were just describing, there was an acknowledgement from our mayors and council members that, yes, we want to do what we can on the regulatory side to facilitate this innovation going mainstream in Utah. A couple of the key questions that they were asking us that I'm going to just put out to this group was one, really that question of affordability, Are there, if the overall efficiencies are going to bring down the cost of housing production, is there a way to ensure that those benefits make it all the way down to the home buyer? So that was a key question, because those mayors and council members, again, reflecting the concerns they're hearing back from the residents, they want to be able to go back to the residents and say, yeah, things are changing, but this is how it's going to benefit us in the long term. So I think there is, at least, speaking for mayors and council members here in Utah, there is appetite to get to yes and figure this out, so that when we're having this panel 5 to 10 years from now, we're talking about the scale of the number of new units that have come online and the new factories that are providing workers, and it's really made a sizable difference in our housing affordability challenges.
Yeah. Now, none of it's going to matter if the land use isn't there, right? Like we do if you go to a factory, go to a Synergy factory or a Autovol or Clayton Homes or somebody, they've got pictures of all their projects that they're doing, and they're really proud of them. You know what they don't have pictures of? The projects that were denied, the places where they weren't allowed to build, right? Using outdated zoning codes, anti-mobile home park codes that were, from the 70s, 80s, 90s that are still in place today in a lot of jurisdictions. And so as Utah's thinking about adopting a modular code, and other places have done it, are there things that we ought to be thinking of with the modular code where we're also tying in the land use, so that we're not stuck with anti-mobile home park zoning that's being interpreted, right? I started this with manufactured, HUD, modular are used interchangeably, right? Double wides. I heard that. I went down to southern Utah a couple of weeks ago, and I heard double wides as well, and a pejorative. And I was like, well, I think a lot of people were happy to have a roof over their head in a double wide for a long time. And, we shouldn't be using that as a pejorative, but.
One of the best things I've seen was started with the mayor of Chicago, who was presenting legislation to not restrict any structure that's built to the state building codes, could not be more stringent than anything else. So we were able to help with the mayor get that to the state level. State law passed. So any structure that's built, i.e. modular, that's built to the state codes, no jurisdiction, municipality can put more stringent guidelines on that structure than what the state codes provide. So if it's built modular and it's built to the same codes, you can't come in and say, no, it can't be here. So the NIMBYs of the world can't say, I can't have a modular home, I can't have a multifamily structure because it's built using modular construction.
What if they don't even approve your zoning? Representative, what if they don't even approve your zoning? You're a state policymaker. What if they don't? What if they deny your rezone request because you want to use modular construction?
I'm not familiar with any cities in our state that do that, but if there are, that's something we need to look from a policy standpoint to allow this type of construction. It should be, and most of the things I've seen from the pictures I've seen, when we're done, you would not be able to tell the difference between a stick-built home and a modular home. So I think that needs to be addressed. I'm not aware of that, but Cameron may be able to speak more to if we have cities that are specifically still prohibiting that type of stuff.
No, I'm not aware of that in Utah either. So I am curious around the country if that's happening, but that's actually not been the response as we've been talking to our elected officials. The elected officials are seeing those pictures and saying, well, that is different than what I thought, and that we want to welcome that in our communities. And Chris, one thing you and I agree on is I really wish we had a different word, because not just the Jetsons piece, but modular. It does sound like something out of outer space.
A little sterile.
Right. As opposed to, well, I can't even come up with a Chris. Maybe we just call it a Chris, right?
Call it a Chris.
But something.
Can we just all agree to that?
So I agree with you there.
I can tell you that even the manufactured housing does not want to be called modular housing. So maybe there's a better word we can.
All right, Q&A. Who's got a question for this great panel? Yeah.
This is a little in the weeds. Just curious, we're in the process of getting our factory certified for the state of Texas, and everybody here is talking about. Repeat that on
Oh, yeah, sorry. So we're in the process of getting our factory certified for the state of Texas. Everybody here is talking about regulations. I'm from Texas. I live in California. Texas likes to talk about its inherent lack of regulation. It's just interesting to note that when Texas certifies a factory, they actually fly out someone for their industrialized housing program, and they sit and watch your house get built all the way through the construction process. The entire time. I actually think it's kind of cool. It's just, I wonder why Texas is so different than all the other states, and I'm wondering if anybody in this room knows. Yeah. And is it because it's Texas? I actually know the answer to that question. It is because it's Texas. But they want to keep people from building outside of the state, moving in, or yeah, sorry, I'd love to hear the answer.
Yeah, so I work very closely with TDLR, which is the entity that runs their modular program. Trust me, I've had this conversation many times as to why they do that, because that's part of the unfortunate slow process of becoming certified to do business in Texas. They unfortunately are not willing to give that up yet. They also don't use third party for plan reviews, which has caused a little heartburn for our industry, as you can imagine. But they're continuing conversations. You know, every part of their leadership team I have a relationship with. And so it's something I think is we're able to overcome eventually, but just right now we've done it this way, we're doing it this way, it's going to work that way. And so I try to prepare our membership when they come to me and say, hey, we want to get certified in Texas. The first thing I tell them is, well, I hope you're prepared for the delay it's going to take to get your factory certified, because it's the first hurdle, that's the hardest hurdle, but once you do that, I can promise you it'll get a little bit smoother down the road.
So go to Oklahoma. All right. Back, the gentleman in the back.
Hi, I'm Brett Rigby. I work with Zenny Home, and we have a suggestion for the name of our industry. We suggest that we call it FAST. It's an acronym that we've come up with, and it stands for Factory Built, Advanced Tech, Sustainable, in our case, Stackable, and Transportable. Our CEO, Bob Worsley, will be speaking a little bit more this afternoon, and I'm sure he'll bring that up, but we suggest fast housing.
I like it. I prefer the Chris.
All right, I actually have a question. John, in Texas, if you get a building reviewed and approved through TDLR, can you just go build that building multiple times? Do you have to go through the inspection and approval process every time?
Has to go through every time.
Okay, because I know that there are people working on that to get to where if you could facilitate an offsite construction method to build a building. So for example, garden style apartments, you could have the same 12-pack building that you're building offsite. You can get it reviewed by the state. That's then approved as a plan set, and it's approved to then go build it multiple times without having to go back through plan review. And people are working on that in Arizona as well, I believe.
Arizona, Louisiana, a couple other states are looking at similar things. I can tell you Louisiana is open to that, so heads up on that one. But we've seen that with several of our members that are trying to essentially put together packet plan reviews, maybe a little more in the weeds on what you're talking about, but essentially we're going to have 125 modules, but they may be configured one of 4 different ways, which is similar to what you're talking about, which to me it makes a lot of sense. But again, it's getting them to be open to that, and I think it has to do with just their familiarity. And TDLR, as you know, is a little more stringent. They used to be in my top 3 as far as programs. They're kind of sliding down the list. But we're working on that. They actually spoke at our World of Modular in San Antonio a couple years ago, and we're able to get some of this direct feedback that I think they need to hear, not just from me as the spokesperson, but the more advantage I have of hearing specific situations, it gives me some tools in my tool belt to go and say, let's talk about this a little further.
And there's actually provisions currently in the code to allow that to happen if a state or locality adopts it. So Appendix N is for replicable buildings. So sort of be able to submit one plan, get that approved. And then, if, there are local requirements, it's just those local requirements that are looked at rather than the entire plan set.
right? And what we find is in some states, they'll allow that for relocatable structures, but then they don't for commercial. So our argument is, well, if you'll do it for a relocatable structure, what's the difference in trying to do that for commercial?
All right, one last question. Anybody? I know you've got one. There you go, sir.
Circling back to the ICC certification. For Utah, we don't actually have to be certified, but if we ship out of the state, then we do. So we're starting that.
Put the microphone up a little close.
We're starting the certification process, and the people that I talked to, it's very expensive. Is there organization or something that would help us get through that certification process?
So you're in Utah here? I think we could work with you to figure out what you got to do to make that happen. I can talk to you offline if you'd like.
And also, is this single family or multifamily? Okay. So that's one of the things that we do, and not to put a plug in, I guess I can, to pay you something later. If you're members of our trade associations, we have one for single family, Modular Home Builders Association, and then the Modular Building Institute. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for both. That's one of the things we do with our membership, is help them connect with the right people to make that process smoother. I can't tell you it's going to be cheaper because their fees are their fees, but I can certainly connect you with the right folks to make it easier and help you understand what your qualifications are.
All right, well, we're going to wrap up. Thank you all for being here today for this panel. If you've got other questions, I'm sure these fine folks will help you. If you're from out of town, welcome to Utah. It looks like this all the time. And if you need a home, come see me. We'll sell you an ivory home.